has emerged alongside many different fintech firms, but it's not necessarily just for the financial sector. So there's many different regulated industries, and anywhere there's regulated industries, there are processes that can be automated. But in terms of the UK, I think a lot of that activity is because the UK as a financial centre. Similarly for the USA, in Luxembourg and Switzerland, also two kind of quite high levels of financial activity happening in those places. So also a lot of Regtech activity. Ireland, Australia, Singapore, Japan, Germany, France, they're some of the major places where many of these Regtech firms are being headquartered. And just looking at kind of 5 of the key kind of areas of Regtech activity. So looking at profiling and due diligence, so being able to assess and verify the identity of different users. So if you're trying to onboard a customer and you want to check that their identity is right, you can take a photo of yourself, for example, or your ID, and you can use that as part of the eKYC process. So some of the examples of firms are Onfido or Jumio. So this type of activity, based on our research, there's about an estimation of around 11,000 people that are working in these types of businesses. They have a turnover about $500 million or so dollars. Looking at the second kind of most common area of Regtech activity is reporting and dashboards, so collecting information from many different sources and put them into a standardized report for managers or for compliance purposes. About 7,000 people are working in businesses that are focused on those types of activities. Third, and a good example of that is Bearing Point, if you want to have a look at what that company does, just so you can see. In terms of risk analytics, so using big data to look at the risk of fraud or market abuse or other types of misconduct. So you can see here, there's about 12,000 people that are working in that area. Starling Trust is a really interesting company that basically looks at a formal, well, one of their use cases is looking at a formal organizational structure, but then looking at data and information about how human beings communicate in that organization. And sometimes as an organization, you might have a formal hierarchy, but the reality of how that organization works might be very, very different. You might have different people who are more trusted, are more influential, are more powerful in the way that they're able to interact with different people. But that's quite a difficult thing to be able to really map. Only when you look at the conversations, if you look at the emails, if you look at the interactions and kind of the social interactions, are you able to really see how an organization works. You might have your formal organizational chart that's drawn out, but actually the way that your organization runs might be very different. And if it runs very differently, then there might be different risks associated to that. So as a starting point to really understand how your organization is structured is important. So it's an interesting company there, Starling Trust. And they, risk analytics, about 12,000 people or so. Dynamic compliance, so being able to look at the regulation that's changing. Remember we saw, what was it, kind of many tens of thousands of changes every year, but be able to have different feeds of information from the central bank, from the securities organization, from other trusted sources of regulatory information, see when the regulation changes, and then provide an alert to the compliance officer to say, hey, this regulation has changed, you might need to be aware of this. And I suppose more advanced version of this is where they use natural language processing to be able to read the information, be able to see what has changed, be able to identify the meaning of that change, and then connect that back to your organization to say, okay, well, this has changed, and this person in this department is going to be affected by that change. You need to go and spend some time to understand what that change means to you. So Align is a good example of that. And then market monitoring, so being able to look at kind of what happens when rules or kind kind of within regulation or businesses, what kind of negative impact is that having on the market? So, for example, poor product performance or poor market conditions. So, in the previous session, we were looking at peer-to-peer lending in China, for example. And in China, there were many thousands of fintech firms providing loans to customers online on these websites. So being able to monitor social media for people complaining about being ripped off by criminal peer-to-peer lending activities, for example, could be a good way for regulators to understand if there is a problem in the market. Are consumers being harmed by these activities? And in that case, it's by unregulated activities. So for you as a regulator or regulators, you need firms to send you the information. But what about if you know that there's lots of these different types of activities going on, but they're not sending you the data? How do you then work out if this is something that requires a rule change, if this is something that you need to take action on? I think there's some interesting different providers out there on that. So, as I mentioned, most of the Regtech providers are looking to serve the financial services sector, but there are many different regulated industries, and so Regtech is relevant for them. So if we take out financial services, then the government or the civil service, they are the top kind of users of Regtech solutions, but then also software, energy utilities, real estate, healthcare, pharma, retail, transport, technology. There's a whole other areas that are being used by different Regtech providers. And actually what we found is of the Regtech businesses that we engage with, we found that the kind of younger, newer Regtech firms were more likely to be looking for users outside of financial services. So kind of newer Regtech firms, maybe they see a Regtech solution working very well in financial services, say, hey, this same problem is in pharmaceuticals or it's in transportation. How can we take these solutions and then apply them to other industries? And also we asked the Regtech firms, we said, okay, so what are your USPs? What's your unique selling point? What makes you different? And 84% of them said that our solution makes your processes more effective. It's also about speed. It's also about their technology, having a differentiation in their use of technology as applied to regulation. About half of the businesses said we will save you money as a business. So if you use our service, your costs will reduce. Also, another important thing that Regtech providers tended to say was we easily integrate with your systems. So if you're a bank or you're a regulator, you have your systems in place, and it might be quite difficult for a third party to come in and integrate with your system. So for a Regtech provider to be able to integrate into your system is a very important function. And also being able to provide real-time monitoring. So these are kind of the key benefits that providers say that they're able to provide. Okay, let's have a look at Regtech and regulators, who's doing what and where. So I showed this diagram this morning in the session before, just looking at different regulators and what they are doing to help stimulate innovation. So some regulators are looking at Regtech solutions, but also maybe you've heard of regulatory sandboxes or innovation offices. So there's many different kind of responses that regulators are using to try and deal with the innovation that they see happening in their markets. And Regtech, kind of the application of Regtech, is one option from many different options that you can use as a regulator. So as we saw this morning, you could take a wait and see approach where you let the industry just evolve, and you, as a regulator, you don't take any action, you just let new businesses and new firms kind of take root. We saw that in China. We saw that here in the Philippines with e-money regulation, for example. We saw that in Kenya with M-Pesa in the beginning before the regulator took action. Let's let this payment, mobile money platform evolve, and then we'll change the regulations after. Test and learn, kind of allowing certain firms to operate and then responding depending on what impact that has in the market. Regulatory sandboxes, so creating kind of a place for innovators to test their innovations with real customers in a kind of a structured format. International coordination, so we'll come to an example of this later on, but regulators working together in order to understand how they can address different fintech activities. Innovation offices, so having a team or a person that's dedicated to fintech in your organization that can answer the questions of the industry and to gather information that you can help to build your kind of institutional understanding and capacity of financial innovation. Infrastructural development. So being able to kind of look at different technologies that are needed to, looking at how as a regulator you can develop different technologies, and this kind of relates to Regtech to be able to help with the regulatory process. And then also kind of regulatory reform. What changes might there be in your regulation that can help to stimulate innovation? Let's have a look at Regtech for regulators. So at the start of this year, we looked at about 100 different jurisdictions, 100 different countries to see what types of regulatory innovation responses they are employing. So of the 110 countries that we surveyed, about, 15 to 20 of them had a Regtech initiative. So quite a small number of regulators have been developing their own Regtech initiative. And in the next 12 months, only 2% of regulators are experimenting with this. So it's still quite a small group of regulators that are really investing time and resources into Regtech. But quite a lot of regulators are kind of considering it. So you can see 27% of the regulators we surveyed are looking at Regtech and seeing if this is relevant or useful for them. So compared to innovation offices and regulatory sandboxes, I think many more regulators are looking at that first. And then kind of Regtech is something many people are exploring, but maybe not a priority at the moment. And just to summarize that data, so about 1 in 6 will run a Regtech program by mid-2020, and more than 1 in 4 are considering one. And also what's quite interesting is of the Regtech firms, about 1 in 5 Regtechs have applied to go into regulatory sandboxes. So many of the Regtech firms are quite interested to see if their solution or their technology is actually relevant and useful for a sandbox. And I suppose maybe some of these firms are thinking about how they can educate the regulator about what they do, as well as help to learn about the regulatory framework to inform their product and service. So here we have the kind of Regtech initiatives specifically. So you can see in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, which we can come on to in a second. So as far as I'm aware, they have at least 2 kind of Regtech initiatives. In Singapore also, there's a number of different initiatives. In Japan as well, I think that's quite an interesting case study that we can come on to. The UK, Mexico and Peru. So you can see quite a few different countries are approaching and exploring different Regtech solutions. So in terms of Suptech, so how are regulators trying to develop solutions themselves? In yellow is kind of experimental, exploratory. In blue is kind of in the process of development, and in red is operational. So you can see for example, the BSP in the Philippines, working on an automated reporting solution and validation, as well as virtual assistants. So they're kind of three kind of topic areas that the central bank in Philippines is working on in development. ASIC, so the regulator in Australia, has quite a number of kind of Suptech initiatives that are actually operational now. So real-time monitoring, so using data and be able to see what's happening in the market now, being able to respond to that. Consolidation and visualization of data, so being able to bring it together and present it in a more understandable format. They have some initiatives on market manipulation and insider trading, so kind of conduct areas as we were discussing. Singapore, so MAS also, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, you can see focus on kind of data analytics with kind of data validation, consolidation and visualization as operational, and then also on kind of conduct areas with market manipulation, insider trading, AML and fraud in terms of Suptech applications that they are exploring. I will share this presentation after, so there's some kind of detail that you can work through yourself. And yeah.
So why would the sharing resolution is here? It's at 3. And as far as I know, like FCA was kind of experimenting with it.
Sorry, say again, sorry?
So machine readable regulation is kind of empty. Yeah.
Yeah,
so some of them we are kind of experimenting, as I know.
Sorry, your organization is?
No, not mine, but for example, I know
the
FCA.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think the FCA is up here for some reason. So I think this might just be either central bank. Oh no, it's not. I'm not sure why they're not up there, to be honest. This is taken from a report by BIS called, where is it? The Suptech Generations. But you're right, the FCA does have an initiative looking at machine readable and machine executable regulation. And that's one of the case studies I hope we can get onto at the end so we can talk through that. But it looks as though at the time of the writing of this report, the other regulators that were surveyed did not have a machine readable Suptech initiative.
Do you know any other regulators who do this?
I know, as you say, I know the FCA are working on that. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is an initiative that is being explored with GFIN as well. I know, so another one of the case studies, at the CCF we are working on a project at the moment to try and basically look at different regulation in different countries and be able to process regulatory information into a taxonomy. So say, for example, you look at AML regulation and you look at the different components of AML regulation and then be able to try to identify those different components in different countries. So if we look at, say, I don't know, the UK, Australia, France, Georgia, Philippines and Thailand, and we look at AML regulation in those different countries, there's going to be many common features between those different countries. So if we start with a taxonomy of what are the different components of AML regulation and be able to then try to identify each component in each country's regulation so that you can then pull out the common areas between different countries, but also look at the differences between them. So I'll come on to this because I've got some more slides and information to explain that in a second. So in terms of the benefits of Regtech, so similarly to much of the kind of fintech area that you'll be hearing about over the coming days, really Regtech for the private sector promises to increase revenue for firms. As we saw in the beginning of the presentation, the cost of compliance is a massive proportion of, well, a sizable proportion of cost for businesses. So if that can be improved in terms of the efficiency, that can reduce the cost of that and increase revenue. Efficiency, also another key area that Regtechs claim to be able to provide users. And risk as well. If you're able to use technology to be able to look at all the different risks associated with a different financial activity, you're able to better manage them and address them. And then supporting innovation as well. So for being able to, for a regulator to get behind the Regtech activity, to be able to provide support for the industry as it develops new solutions and technologies. Regtechs are also working extensively with corporates and with professional services firms. So, for example, for accountancy firms or professional services firms, it seems that they are looking to work with different Regtech providers, because if they are able to use technology to enhance the services they provide to their clients, then it means that they are basically a more valuable client to their clients. So similarly with corporates and professional services firms, many Regtech firms are partnering with them. Universities to a lesser extent, law firms, and even fewer within government. So only 7% of the Regtechs that we work with were collaborating with governments. And I think the private sector is more of a challenge compared to many other fintech areas. Where the kind of industry is kind of growing extremely quickly, for example. Many of the different areas in Regtech are finding it, I think, more challenging based on the feedback that we were getting. So in terms of how different Regtech providers are being treated by regulators, some of the feedback was that some regulators don't take a technology neutral view. So maybe they prefer certain technologies over others, and so they treat certain Regtech providers differently. Some Regtech kind of startups are saying that they feel that the industry or regulators don't see their technology as developed enough. It's too immature to take the risk to go and buy that service, which means that they find it difficult to go and sell their products to businesses. Also, for many Regtech providers, I think both in kind of the private sector for corporates, but also for regulators, the procurement process to be onboarded as a vendor can take a very long time, and that is a major challenge for Regtech firms. If they have to wait 12 or 18 months to go through a procurement process before they can be integrated into the system, that is very, very difficult. Also, many corporates, but perhaps also regulators as well, their IT planning cycles and change take a very, very long time. So for a new Regtech or technology solution to be integrated into the IT strategy of a big organization, that can take a very long time and be very, very challenging. Also, compliance is maybe not the top priority for most businesses. Most businesses are focused on, for example, product development or revenue generation, and compliance is less of a priority, and therefore investment in Regtech solution is less of a priority than in other areas. And also many Regtech firms struggle to kind of compete with established providers. So data analytics firms, maybe some of the major firms that you might have heard of, the smaller, newer firms struggle to take business off them. So these are some of the challenges that the private sector faces. Other kind of feedback from the industry suggests that kind of the cost of acquiring a user is very, very expensive. But quite, as you can imagine, quite kind of technical sales, a Regtech user will need to go and spend a lot of time with the user, whether that be a regulator or a financial service provider or another industry, to help them understand exactly the problem that they are currently addressing, and then how their solution will help to address that. So the time and money taken to acquire a new customer is very high. Another kind of key challenge is data privacy and protection. So I guess this relates to certain businesses, for example, in transaction monitoring perhaps, or being able to monitor unstructured data in social media. with new data regulations within GDPR, maybe that can stop the use of data that is needed in order to be able to create the useful insights that Regtech firms claim to provide. Another kind of key challenge, just one more, is kind of training and keeping employees. Once you have spent the time and effort to train up different people, then they move on to another organization. So this is another kind of one of the key threats that the industry has stated. And for regulators, so those regulators that have introduced a Regtech initiative, they say that the biggest benefit that they have received from this program is improving understanding of technology. So far and away, 93% of the regulators that have a Regtech solution now better understand the different technologies that are involved in Regtech that we saw earlier. A big proportion, 71%, say it's helped to build strong networks with the industry. So bringing all the different Regtech providers together, bringing in the different ecosystem players to address a particular Regtech focused problem has been a great benefit. And also kind of just being able to provide the industry with guidance as well. But I think the two kind of key benefits there is helping to improve regulators' understanding of the technologies involved in Regtech and building a tighter, stronger network with all the different